News, Donald Trump is asking a judge to throw out the election subversion case against him.
My name is Steve, I'm a douche. My name is Brian Kill Myself, and this is Fox and Friends.
In Georgia, the former president's legal team just filed a motion claiming presidential immunity, just like they have in other cases. CNN's Paula Reed has been going through the court filings. Paula, what's his reasoning for wanting
If this gets dropped, I'm losing faith in the
Dana,
American
this is all
justice
very
system.
familiar. The
Okay,
former
look
president's
out.
lawyers arguing that presidential immunity should protect him from this sprawling RICO case down in Georgia. And that argument might sound familiar because it is the exact same argument they made in his federal election subversion case. And this question of presidential immunity, this is going to be the focus of a much anticipated oral argument tomorrow before the D.C. Court of Appeals. Trump's even expected to attend. Now, in today's state filing, they're making many of the same arguments they've made in the past. They argue that in and around.
You have faith in our criminal justice system? Yes. Because the only thing I have faith in within our criminal justice system is that they will always make content. It might be horrifying content, it might be funny content, but our court structure will yield content, okay? Straight up. Like, I'm not saying it's just. Not at all. Unless you're thinking about the content, in which case, then yes. So, for them to turn around and refuse to give us this Georgia televised court proceeding, woo! I'd be pissed.
Around January 6th, Trump was acting in his official capacity as president. They argue that conversations he had with state officials about election proceedings, that's all.
He's been looking extra shit, by the way. Like, he's been looking real bad. I noticed it in the last speech he gave. He just looks so burnt. I don't know what it is. I don't know if he's like lost weight as well. Have you heard a Civil War take? No, I think I heard bits and pieces of it. He was just like trying to. Does anyone have the Civil War take? Actually, I would love to see it. They're lowering the video resolution so you can't see how shitty he looks in his rallies now. Wait, no way. No, they're not. That's crazy. It's like saying you're deliberately running ad breaks so people don't see how shitty Trump looks at the top of the hour. It's like, no, that's just a thing that I do at the top of the hour. And also you can avoid the ads and see how shitty Trump looks at the top of the hour, just like every other part of the hour, as long as you subscribe for $5 or free with a Twitch Prime. Is that the best type of segue? No. Did I try my best? Yes. And sometimes you should give me a 10-10 just for trying hard, okay? Participation trophy style. Just like sometimes you get a gifted sub to avoid the top of the hour ad break, participation trophy style. Here's the 3-minute ad break now.
All part of his official duties as president. And of course, they argue that because it was part of his official duties as president that he should be protected under presidential immunity. These are the same arguments they've made before in the federal case, but so far the courts have not seen it this way. This argument was dismissed at the district trial level here in Washington, D.C. His former White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, has also argued similar issues, and a court of appeals dismissed the idea that election-related activities, that those are really part of his official federal duties. Now, this question about immunity, the extent to which the former president has any protections for his actions around January 6th, Dana, this is a question that could ultimately end up at the Supreme Court. Special counsel Jack Smith has already asked the high court once to just weigh in and settle this once and for all. They declined to do that. Instead, letting oral arguments go ahead in the Court of Appeals. Whatever happens after these oral arguments or the Georgia case, it is highly likely that the justices will again be asked to weigh in on this. It's unclear if they're going to want to weigh in here. But one thing that is for sure is that by litigating this at the federal and state level, the former president has been at least successful in delaying his federal case and could be successful in delaying the state case as well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously he would like immunity, but the short-term goal is to delay, as you've been saying for quite some time. You mentioned that he is going to be in court tomorrow for an appeals court hearing.
I love diversity.
He has a
CNN.
pretty significant courtroom scheduled this week, the final week before the Iowa caucuses.
Bro, they look like different variants of one another. Like, it's the same person, but just like slightly different. Crazy. Which is ironic because it's also identical to fucking Fox News, too. It's the same, whatever.
He sure does. I mean, we're seeing the intersection between the campaign events and all these legal proceedings. This is something we've been talking about for quite some time. And tomorrow, arguably constitutionally the most consequential day, his lawyers and lawyers for the special counsel will argue before an appellate panel about this issue of immunity. But Dana, even one of his former lawyers, Tim Parlatore, has told me on air, he just doesn't expect him to win on the merits. But again, if the larger strategy, the broader strategy is at least to try to get that federal case delayed until after the November 2024 election, in some ways, they've already won. And then later this week, there will be closing arguments in another civil case that he faces up in New York. Now, there's no jail time on the line here. This is not a criminal case, but it's really personal for the former president. It's about his business, their ability to do business in the state of New York, potentially facing hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties. We've seen him show up to numerous proceedings in the course of that case. He's watched his children testify. It has been incredibly personal, a lot on the line for him, and that's just 1 week.
It is just 1 week, and many more to come that look a lot like what you just described. Thank you so much for that reporting, Paula.
Joining us right now is Michael Moore, former U.S. attorney and CNN legal analyst. So, Michael, the filing in Georgia making a similar argument of presidential immunity that his team is making in the federal case against him that we're watching for this big moment, this appeals court.
Damn, chat is so fast.
This appeals court taking up that question tomorrow. But is
Emma,
this Georgia
Parma
filing
him.
different than the question now before this federal appeals court?
300 seconds is way too
Well,
little.
good morning. I'm glad to be with all of you. It really is the same thing, and we expected to see this filing. The filing is coming not because it's some new matter before the court, but because there's a motion deadline. So the defendants had to file these types of motions in the case today.
I was just taking 300 seconds to look at his life. Oh, you know, it's devastatingly bad. Wait 9 extra minutes after the follow period to say specifically that.
Get this out and to have some consideration, the judge could at least know what motions were pending. We expected to see this. This has been raised in some of the arguments. Trump's new lawyer in Georgia has talked about this extensively, but really the issue in the motion is whether or not a former president can be liable for acts he committed while he was president of the United States. And they argue that, in fact, because he was acquitted in his impeachment trial,
That's all you got?
that then bars him from further prosecution during or because of those acts that occurred while he was president. That's always been a little bit of a different linchpin and maybe a kink, if you will, in the district attorney's case here in Georgia. And that is that she focused her conduct, by and large, on things that happened while he was president, not on witness intimidation after he was president, not on other acts, but on actual things that happened during his presidency. And so, as we know, the president's vested with a lot of power. One of those things is, in fact, to have involvement in elections. The FBI is involved, DHS is involved, the U.S. Attorney's offices all over the country involved. Those are federal functions. And as head of those federal agencies, the question is whether or not any acts he took might be arguably in support of those functions. And that ultimately be the question the appeals court addresses this week.
And that is what the appeals court is addressing this week, exactly. The scope of Donald Trump's presidential immunity. And what you've seen in the arguments that obviously Jack Smith, the special counsel, says his case is entirely based on the fact that he does not think Trump has presidential immunity. Donald Trump's team arguing the opposite. How strong or weak do you think Trump's argument is for absolute immunity at this point?
I think both sides have sort of pushed the boundaries of rationality. Jack Smith argues that, well, you can't give absolute immunity because a president might order that the minority party members in Congress be killed during the State of the Union address or something. That seems to be such a ridiculous stretch that I think that defies some credulity. At the same time, Trump says, well, I'm immune from anything. I can do anything I want to, which presumably would mean he could then, collude with Russia, or he could do other things that we might say, no, that pushes the boundaries too. And so the needle that has to be threaded, I think, is what are really presidential functions? What are the things we expect from a president?
Donald Trump could shoot someone during a State of the Union address, and then by the very same metric say, no, the very act of him shooting someone during the State of the Union was actually a part of his presidential duties, and therefore he should be immune from prosecution. You know what I mean? I trust this guy with his accent and dress. I agree. The old cow viewer, you got to try harder, brother. Try harder, buddy. You're failing.
This case, though, because he has not been charged in Jack Smith's case with the insurrection, you begin to question, well, will the appeals court look at that as some indication that there's not enough evidence that he was criminally responsible for the insurrection and those things, and instead try to focus on these issues dealing with the election counting and the vote counting and that kind of stuff? And that seems to be a little bit stronger. I think at the end of the day, he's not going to win simply on presidential immunity. I just don't. It just seems to be one of his weaker arguments as he goes forward. But we all knew, and I think this is expected on both sides of the aisle, and that is that the Supreme Court is going to have to weigh into this, because this case and this issue is not just about Trump. It's about the president 50 years from now and 100 years from now, and what presidential power and presidential immunity will mean going forward, not just as we look sort of at the past of the oddities of the Trump administration.
Yeah, and from, district court to, in one state, to a federal case against him. I mean, you're making an excellent point. It's great to see you, Michael. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
We have the latest now on the race for the White House. The Iowa caucuses, where voters will cast the first votes of the 2024 campaign, are just 1 week away. Over the weekend, the Republican candidates were out in force in the state. Rachel Scott tracking it all from Iowa. Good morning to you, Rachel.
Robin, good morning. It was an all-out frenzy here over the weekend with the Republican candidates crisscrossing this.
This guy's a little appointed by Obama to be the U.S. attorney. Insane how he thinks Jack Smith's argument the president would literally be a god king and could do whatever he wants, not a good one. This argument is literally valid because I wouldn't put it past it Trump to have every congressional Democrat killed if this decision goes his way when he gets elected. Okay, if you think genuinely that Trump is going to kill every congressional Democrat, you're out of your mind. However, I think the God King argument is good because that's kind of what America is not about, right? It's supposed to be the one thing, like it's the one objective, universal value that the American government, in the Revolutionary War, like stood against. It is at the foundation of this country. If you were to say, yes, they wanted to continue chattel slavery. Yes, they wanted to ensure that the democratic process was only dealt with by, landowning white people. All of that is true. But the one thing that they were not on board with was having a God king. It goes against the most important principle of like building this country. It's just, that's it. That there is nothing that is more objectively un-American than that. I don't think that Trump is going to like become the, president and then execute every Democrat or whatever, right? I do, however, think that he will be just as authoritarian, maybe even more authoritarian than he was last time around, and awful. But in my opinion, you pulled up my link once, Historia Civilis, can a monarch commit crimes? Hope you watch it one day. I kind of want to watch it. I do want to watch it. He ain't no big city lawyer. He's not. That guy, he ain't no big city lawyer. That much is true. Where is it? Pinkerton, Hamas, Piker? What is happening? Where is the Historia Civilis video? Why don't you link it now? I hate how winnable Trump has made this election for Democrats. First of all, it's not that winnable. Secondly, I don't hate it. I mean, I don't think people should feel like it's winnable. I don't think the Democrats should feel as though it is winnable. Because it certainly, in my opinion, is not as winnable as the Democrats think it is.
The state still trying to chip away at Donald Trump's commanding lead.
With the Iowa caucuses just 1 week away, the Republican candidates are blitzing through the state, still trying to catch Donald Trump. The former president 30 points ahead, facing backlash for saying the Civil War, which was fought over the issue of slavery, could have been negotiated.
So many mistakes were made. See, there was something I think could have been negotiated, to be honest with you.
Do you find those comments acceptable?
I don't even know how to judge. I don't even know what he's talking about. I mean, Lincoln did what he had to do. He ended up...
Yo! Let's watch the original. This is my favorite type of thing because, like, they have to, step over one another to be the most racist, right? So let's take a look. And Ron DeSantis has to, like, be contrary to Donald Trump now. And if Donald Trump is being racist, he can't be like, no, I'm way more racist than he is.
War was so fascinating, so horrible. It was so horrible, but so fascinating. It was, I don't know, it was just different. I just find it, I'm so attracted to seeing it. So many mistakes were made. See, there was something I think could have been negotiated, to be honest with you. I think you could have negotiated that. All the people died. So many people died.
He's such a fucking lib, dude. He's like, come on, just vote. Just vote slavery away. Why can't you negotiate with the slavers? Yeah, dude, totally. That actually was not brought forward at all. It was just kind of, 0 to 100. That's how it worked. Yeah, famously, Abraham Lincoln was like, no, it's time for war, I think.
That was the disaster. If you got hit by a bullet in the leg, you were essentially going to die or lose the leg. That's why you had so many people, no legs, no arms. If you got hit in the arm or the leg, it meant you were up because the infection, gangrene. It was just such a, sort of a horrible time. But I was thinking to myself, because I was reading something, and I said, this is something that could have been negotiated. It was just for all those people to die, and they died viciously.
It's so sick to be the type of guy who, I don't know, watches a Civil War documentary and says to himself, this is something that could have been negotiated. That's awesome. Yeah, notice how I skipped past the fact that he said he was reading something and immediately went to watching a documentary because that's precisely what he was doing. Ain't no fucking way. He was reading something about the Civil War. Come on.
It was a vicious, vicious war. And in many ways, look, there's nothing nice about it. But boy, that was a tough one for our country. But I think
nothing nice about it.
It's, Abraham Lincoln. Of course, if you negotiated it, you probably wouldn't even know who Abraham Lincoln was.
What?
He would have been president, but he would have been president. And he wouldn't have been the Abraham Lincoln. Would have been different, but that would have been okay. It would have been a thing.
Is he trying to say that Abraham Lincoln, like, was what, like he did the Civil War because he was like kind of selfish, like he wanted to be remembered as a great leader? That's why he did the Civil War. Also, if he's being remembered as he did it for clout. Abraham Lincoln did the Civil War for clout. Emancipation Proclamation for clout. 4 scores, folks. What's that about? Wearing a big top hat.
And I know it very well. I know the whole process that they went through, and they just
he knows it very well.
Get along, and that would have been something that could have been negotiated, and they wouldn't have had that problem. But it was a hell of a time. And you think of it today.
It was a hell of a time.
I would have absolutely stopped Putin. He would have never gone in, and he didn't. You know, for 4 years he didn't. It was never even
Putin. God, he has such a beautiful way of weaving through subject matter. No, he's just saying, like, if the Civil War didn't happen, Abe Lincoln wouldn't be remembered like Grover Cleveland. Okay, but, like, he also is making it seem as though... He's also kind of making it seem as though the Civil War is not so great, and Abe did it for clout. Like, he could have negotiated it, but then, due to his clout goblin ways, he wanted to, like, be remembered. Russia versus the armies participating in the U.S. Civil War of the 19th century. Who you got?
Ushering in the abolition of slavery, and he saved the Union.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was long seen as Trump's toughest opponent. He's already visited all 99 counties. Now he's in a battle for second place with former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley.
I like to be the underdog, so I'm just letting that sit. Let people say what they want.
But do you believe you can win?
We've done it right, and we're gonna do well.
If you do not place first or second place, are you staying in this race?
We're in it for the long haul.
In it for the long haul, regardless.
Absolutely.
Haley has spent the last several days walking back comments she's made on the trail. First, failing to mention the word slavery when asked by a voter what caused the Civil War, then suggesting New Hampshire would correct the Iowa caucuses, and now facing new questions from voters about why she isn't going after Trump harder.
Pro-Trumpers don't think I love him enough. Anti-Trumpers don't think I hate him enough. For those that want me to hit Trump more, I just am not going to do it.
And the weather throwing these campaigns a little bit of a curveball. The Trump campaign forced to cancel a surrogate event due to some brutal snow and heavy cold that is now on the way.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the...
I mean, yeah, she's admitting that she's cowardly because Trump would roast her. I mean, he's just too popular. I feel like she wants to be... Maybe she wants to be in the cabinet. I don't know. Nikki Haley would probably be the best VP pick for Trump.
Exclusive report.
Insider calls Trump's demeanor on January 6th very unsettling.
Reporting on what Trump insiders have told the special counsel about
3
the
years,
president's
and we still get new content from January 6th. The gift that keeps on giving.
Storm the Capitol. Chief Washington correspondent John Carl has the details. Good morning, John.
Good morning, George. ABC News has learned new details about what the people who were with Donald Trump on January 6th have told federal investigators about his behavior inside the White House while the Capitol was under attack. Sources familiar with the investigation say that some of the most vivid details come from one of Trump's closest advisors, somebody who has worked for him for more than 30 years and remains one of his senior advisors today. As the nation marks the 3-year anniversary of the January 6th attack, Donald Trump defended his supporters who ransacked the Capitol, calling for those who have been imprisoned for breaking into the building to simply be released.
I call them hostages. Some people call them prisoners. I call them.
There's nothing funnier than the switch up, the collective switch up. Basically, every fucking Republican went through. Day of, they're like, these guys are criminal terrorists, Antifa, and need the death penalty. And then they're like, oh, well, these guys don't represent the Republican Party. And Trump is like, oh, I'm so sorry for the actions. And then literally, like 3 years after the fact, now they're like, you know, these guys are political hostages. We need to release them. And it's like, bro, they've been in prison for like 3 years. Some of them came out already. If I'm a Jan 6er, I'm so pissed. Because, like, this guy abandoned me. I did everything for him. I did everything right. I dropped everything for him. And then this guy abandoned me. Except, of course, they're so profoundly stupid that it doesn't even matter. They just like, they still think like, oh, now he's calling us hostages. He's right. God King Trump.
Hostages. Release the J6 hostages, Joe.
The Justice Department has charged nearly 1,300 people allegedly involved in the attack, as well as Trump himself. After lengthy court battles, Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigators have spoken to all of the senior aides who were with Trump at the White House while the Capitol was under attack, including trusted aide Dan Scavino, a man who has known Trump since he was a teenager and worked as his golf caddy. Inside the White House, Scavino ran Trump's Twitter accounts and all social media.
The great Dan Scavino, most powerful man in politics.
Scavino.
I love this. Trump is very good to like all the fail sons around him. He does end up, you know, he has a farming program for sure. What I do find really funny is that we found out that the first tweet that came from the Trump account didn't come from Trump directly, but came from Dan Scavino, which goes back to the same thing that I've advocated for since day one, which is I don't believe Trump wanted to ever stop the protesters. And due to the pure selfish reasons, he wanted them to keep going because he wanted to see how far they could take it. Okay. And that is what happened. And Scavino felt the pressure, so he's the one who actually posted that tweet. I think he honestly found it entertaining. Yeah, no, I think he was mad. He was mad and he wanted to see how much he could burn down.
Spent much of January 6th at Trump's side. Sources say Scavino told investigators that Trump sat in the dining room next to the Oval Office as his supporters attacked the Capitol. And then as Scavino and other aides pleaded with Trump to do something to stop the violence, Trump sat in front of the TV, unresponsive, his arms folded. Scavino called Trump's demeanor very unsettling. The sources say Scavino told investigators that Trump was angry, saying the election had been stolen from him and that his supporters were, quote, angry on his behalf. Much of that anger was directed at Trump's loyal vice president, Mike Pence. And sources say another White House aide, Nick Luna, told investigators that when he informed Trump that Pence had to be evacuated to a secure location because of the threats, Trump responded, "So what?"
Our sources tell us Scavino was also asked directly whether he ever saw any evidence that there was election fraud in 2020 enough to change the election results. And like so many others close to Trump, under oath when asked that question, he said no. He never saw any evidence that the election was stolen. The Trump campaign has responded to our report by saying, quote, Dan Scavino is one of President Trump's longest serving, most loyal allies, and his actual testimony shows just how strong President Trump is positioned in this case. Lindsay?
What?
All right, Jonathan Karl for us. Thanks so much, John.
Hi, everyone.
They got your bagman to sing like a bird. The fuck do you mean? Do you agree that Mike Pence's actions on that day were pivotal in preventing a true constitutional crisis that day, or do you think his role is overblown and overestimated? His role is overblown and overestimated. Why? Because there is no world in which this plan was going to work. The certification process is pure symbolism. Okay? It's purely symbolic. The idea, and I've said this in January 6th, and I've repeated this many times over since then, the idea that somehow, like, stopping the process, or Mike Pence being like, I refuse to certify the elections. I refuse to certify the elections. I can't do it. We're going to send it back to the states. Like, that doesn't change the outcome at all. It's just like, yeah, as someone said, it's a ceremonial proceeding. It's far too late in the game at that point. It's like thinking, here, I'll give you another example. It's like thinking if Trump doesn't attend the inauguration and do the ceremonial passing over of the presidency to the next president, then magically he's still president. You know what I mean? Like, no, everybody knows who the president is at that point. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, oh, well, Trump never surrendered office, so technically, it's like Admiralty Maritime Court guys. You know what I mean? It's like weirdly talking about the rules as though they're super significant. It reminds me of the guys who are like, no, you don't understand. Like, you know, there's a gold crescent, or there's a gold there's a gold crest on top of the American flag, which means this is an Admiralty Maritime Court. So rules are not rules. Or like a sovereign citizen thinking like, oh, well, I'm not driving, I'm traveling. Like, yeah, dude, the symbolic vote certification process was not completed, which means now Trump can be president again. Like, okay. Now, some of those rules are very silly, but people do take it seriously. I guess it's a matter of like how hard liberals would take those rules seriously. Like, because if you ask me, I think like the Supreme Court is silly, right? I think like strict textualism is a silly way of looking at the Constitution. I think it's like completely made up. I will never be convinced that this is a real, genuine, legal, scholarly school of thought. I don't believe it.